Hey guys, so we got another one today. This is a Volvo S60. Problem with this one is it's not getting any charge to the battery, so the alternator is bad. It's not charging, so the battery keeps dying. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead today and replace the alternator. Yeah, so let's get started. Okay guys, so we're gonna be replacing the alternator today, which is located underneath the power steering pump. So we're gonna have to get off the serpentine belt. Probably gonna have to move the power steering pump out of the way, upper radiator hose, and see what else we have to move to get to that power steering pump. But the first thing we gotta do is disconnect the battery. But as you can see, in these Volvos, you don't see a battery under the hood. Let me show you where they're located. Okay guys, so in these Volvos, the battery is located in the trunk. So if you look underneath the floor mat in the trunk, you'll find the battery. So we're gonna get a 10mm socket and disconnect this battery so we can get work started. Okay guys, so we're gonna remove this negative battery terminal. It's a 10mm bolt. There we go. I think the bolt is a little bit of stripped, so it's giving us some problem, but if it's really badly stripped, one trick I learned is we can take a smaller socket and pound it on and get it off that way and then replace the bolt later. Okay, so we got the T55 Torx bit on the ratchet and we're just pushing forward on the tensioner. Like I said, sometimes it's kind of tricky to get these Volvo belts on where the tensioner bolt is located for the Torx bit. So just push forward to the front of the vehicle and remove the belt. So, once you get the belt off, pull the ratchet out. And again, I like to use a long handle swivel ratchet with the Torx bits. Okay guys, so the next step is we gotta remove the power steering pump lines. I didn't want to remove it for the fluid not to leak out, but looks like it's in the way and I'm gonna have to remove it. So for this in here, I'm gonna use a 16mm bolt for the hard line, and then on the soft line, it's gonna be an 8mm socket. So I'm gonna go ahead and crack the hard line, get it broken free. Breaks free pretty easily because it's a compression fitting. And then I'm gonna slack the soft line. That's just a regular hose clamp. Slide that off the line, get it removed out of the way. So you want to have a catch pan on the bottom ready because you're gonna lose some fluid, so just be mindful of that. So I'm gonna remove the nut from the hard line completely. Gonna pull that hose out. Sometimes these ones can be a little stuck in there because they are compression fittings, and they just pop right out like that. Move it up and out of the way. This is the line that we removed. You also want to check the little O-ring at the end and make sure it doesn't have any cracks or damage to it when reassembling. The next, we're going to remove the soft line, which just slides right off like a hose barb. Get that, move that out of the way. You want to try and keep it upward so you don't lose as much fluid as possible. I like to just squeeze it in between this torsion bar on the engine. And then, yeah, next step is going to be remove this power steering pump. Okay guys, so the next step is going to be, we got three 12mm bolts that's holding on this power steering pump. So how we're going to access that is through the power steering pump pulley. There's holes made through the pulley. So we're going to take the socket and reach through those holes and then reach and get those bolts inside there. A flex head ratchet is really helpful during this process. So yeah, we're going to crack these three bolts free and get this pump removed. I got one right there. I got two. And this back one is a little tricky. Got them. Okay, so I got all three bolts out now. So yeah. Okay, so we got all three of the bolts on this power steering pump cracked free. but the bolts are inside behind this pulley, so you can't reach it with your finger. We have to crack it free with a shallow socket because we don't have room because of the fuse box. So what we're gonna do to get it out is we're gonna use a deep socket, and we're just gonna remove it by hand. So we're gonna find the same hose on top of the pulley, get it attached to the socket, and just spin it off by hand. So we got this one here almost out. See, so we got that one out. So we're just gonna do the same process on all three bolts, and then we'll go to the next step. Okay guys, so we got all three bolts off of this power steering pump. So the next thing is just grab them and lift them right out. It comes right out. These are the three bolts in the back here, as you can see. And these are the holes I was talking about that we go through to get to the bolt. So yeah, on to the next step. Okay guys, so the next step gonna be is we're gonna remove the old alternator. It has three bolts. There's one in the front and two on the bottom. So if you're not familiar where the bolts are, all you have to do is just look at the new part, and you'll see the mounting holes for one goes there and the two bottom bolts. So they're gonna be 12mm. So that's the next thing we're gonna remove, so we can get the alternator out and disconnect the electrical connectors from the back of the alternator. Okay, for this process, I'm going to use a 12mm deep socket with a flex head ratchet. I like these slim build ratchets. They fit really in the tight spots really easily. So yeah, I'm going to remove the upper 12mm bolt. The good thing with these flex head ratchets is it lets you move the handle a little bit out of the way of obstacles, so it's really helpful. When I'm almost there, I'm going to switch out and take the ratchet out, because the ratchet won't fit between the electrical box and the alternator bracket with the socket on. So I'm just going to finish removing it by hand. If it was still tight, after I get it little ways out like this, I could always switch over to a shallow socket. But in this case, it's just finger tight already, so I'm able to just remove it by hand. So next we're going to go after the two bolts below the alternator. Those are also 12mm. So I'm gonna put the 12mm socket on. Reach down there to the lower bolts. Sometimes these bolts are really tight, sometimes they're not so tight. So it just all depends on, you know, the car. See, these ones are pretty loose. So I'm gonna just loosen those out. Gonna loosen that one next to them. And then, so yeah, I'm going to continue getting that bottom two bolts out and then go on to the next process. So I just removed the other bottom bolt on the alternator. There's one more left still in there. I use the same method where I crack them free with the ratchet and use my fingers to turn the socket because of the tight space to get the bolt out. But you want to be mindful that some of the bolts might not be all the same length. So we got a short one on the top and this long one came from the bottom. So we're going to check the length of the last one when it comes out and see if it's the same. And you just want to try and remember where they go. If you can't remember where they go, you can always, one thing I did when I first started off to kind of remember where parts went is I used envelopes or Ziploc bags and just write on them, you know, lower alternator bolts, upper alternator bolts, and just put them in little Ziploc bags. So like I mentioned earlier, the boats are different lengths. So the upper boat was a short one and the bottom two is the long boats. So just be mindful that, you know, the long ones go on the bottom, the short one goes on the top. And yeah, so now the next step is going to be removing the alternator. So after looking at the alternator here, it seems that the AC compressor is also kind of blocking the alternator to being removed. So it looks like I'm gonna have to slack the bottom two bolts of the alternator, which the bottom two bolts of the AC compressor. So it seems to be a 12 millimeter, but it's in a real tight spot, so I'm gonna try a shallow socket. Okay, so as you can see, I got the ratchet on the lower bolt of the AC compressor, so I'm just gonna slack it. I'm not gonna remove it. I'm just making it loose so we got some wiggle room to remove the alternator. Got the first one loose. Now I'm loosening the second one. And like I said, we're not taking it all the way out, we're just loosening it. See, when I loosen down there, the alternator kind of just jerked free. So now we got the alternator free. So now we can go and get him out. Disconnect the electrical connectors in the back. So you see, came out of the spot now. So now we're just gonna go ahead and disconnect the electrical in the back of the alternator. Okay guys, so now that we got the alternator out from its mounting bolts, the next step is gonna be the little wire connector in the back. I like to use a long reach pliers, needle nose pliers for this ones, and just reach down there. And this one doesn't have any special clip, you just pull right out. So you just pinch it and you just pull out. The connector comes right off. The next step is going to be the positive wire on the back of the battery. It's a 14 millimeter. The positive wire on the back of the alternator. So reach down there with a 14 millimeter and just crack it free. Once you get it pretty loose, you probably can just remove it by hand. So I got it loose. Still pretty tight. So I'm going to continue using the ratchet. There we go. Got it loose enough now. So got that nut off. That holds the positive wire to the back of the alternator. Remove that wire, got the plug off. So now the alternator, we can just find a good angle and just remove it straight out. There we go. So now we got the old alternator out. We're gonna just go and match it to the new alternator and make sure it's the exact same one and get it installed. Okay, here you see we got the old alternator and the new alternator. As you can see, everything's the same on it. The mounting bolts are all in the same location. The electrical connectors are all the same. The pulley in the front where the belt rides on is the same. So yeah, this is the right one, so I'm gonna get it installed. Okay guys, so I just wanted to give you guys a better view of where the alternator sits in. So as you can see down there, this is the AC compressor and these are the bolts back here where the alternator mounts into. So this is the reason why we have to loosen the bottom two bolts of this AC compressor. Is it looks like the alternator gets sandwiched in between the AC compressor and the block of the engine. So yeah, so I'm gonna slide the new alternator in this slot right here where it sits in and get it all bolted up. Okay guys, so we got the new alternator here and we're just gonna wiggle it in the same way we got the other one out. It's a little tight fit, but it'll get in there. got it dropped in. Now I'm gonna slide it back to that slot I was telling you guys earlier that this alternator sits into. There we go, got it dropped in. The next thing is, well, before I bolt it in, I want to get all these electrical connectors connected. So push in the prong on that one. And now I want to hook up the electrical positive cable. Okay. Got the wire on the ring terminal in the back of the alternator. Gonna get the nut for it. This new alternator, the nut size for the terminal is 12 millimeter now, so it's not a 14. So it's gonna be a different size socket to reattach the cable. So I got the 12 millimeter here. And like I mentioned in some of my other videos, when working with electrical, always make sure you snug it up really well, because a bad connection on electrical will cause a lot of problems. Just working in tight spots is always a little bit challenging, but like on any other car, and can be a car, anything you're working on, boat, motorcycle, ATV, patience is the key. If you ever get in a situation where you're starting to have a hard time or you're getting frustrated, the best thing is just take a break, walk away, even come back the next day, give it some time, because if you try and rush it, you'll most likely end up breaking stuff. So there we go, the nut is starting to get tight. I'm gonna make sure I snug it up really good because it's electrical. Got it nice and tight. Okay, realign the alternator back in its position. It's getting a little tough time getting it in there. There we go. Dropped in its position. So now I'm gonna get the bolts, get it started by hand, and then tighten it up with a ratchet. Okay guys, so we got the bolts for the alternator here. So I'm gonna start at the bottom bolts, slide it in, and now it's just a matter of getting everything lined up again. Right there, got it kind of seated in. You always gotta kind of wiggle it around a little bit to get it to start the threads. Once you get it started, crank it a few in by hand. Gonna get the next one. You want to get all the bolts started too before you tighten anything down all the way, because you see how I have to wiggle it a little bit to get everything lined up. If you tighten one down, you'll lose the play that the alternator can jiggle around a little bit to get everything started. And for the upper one, since it's in a tight spot, I'm gonna use a socket to help get the bolt started in that hole. So I'm gonna put it in by hand first, get the socket on the back of it, then rock the alternator back and forth until it lines up. Oh, missed it. There we go. So looks like we got it on that one. So now I'm gonna go ahead and tighten everything down by hand as much as I can. So I got all the 3 bolts in and all the threads started. So now I'm just gonna go around and tighten them all by hand till they're snug. Then I'll come back with the ratchet and finishing up the tightening process. Okay, move down to the bottom ones. Move on to the other one. Okay, so we got them all pretty much started. Now I'm gonna get the ratchet and snug them up and go around in a. I don't like to tighten them all the way in one bolt, so I'll just go and snug each one a little bit until I got them all pretty much tight and do the final tightening. Okay, so now we're just tightening down the two lower bolts from the alternator, making sure it's nice and snug. There you go, other side. This side is a little tricky because the alternator is kind of in the way. Without a flex ratchet, it would be pretty tough to do, but you probably can get it done without a flex ratchet. Got it tight. Tighten the front one down. Nice and tight. Now we're gonna tighten that two bottom bolts from the AC compressor that we loosened earlier. A lot of these bolts, it's really hard to see, so you just gotta kind of go by feel. Got one of them tight. I'm gonna go over to the other side one. This is where the flex head ratchets really come into play and makes the job a lot easier, especially this long handle type. There you go, nice and tight. So we got everything all bolted up. Okay guys, so the next step is going to be putting this power steering pump back on, and it's going to be the 3 bolts. So we just slide it back onto where his mount was. Okay, so now we got the power steering pump back in its position. We're gonna go ahead and start all of the mounting bolts for it. Trick is trying to find a position to get them in really good. Probably gonna use the socket again. Slip it on the bolt and use this to get it started. There you go. Snug the bottom one up just a little bit, just so it doesn't slip off the threads. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and put the bottom one on. This is the tough one, this lower one. There we go. So we got all 4 bolts started. I'm going to get the ratchet with its shallow 12mm socket and tighten it up. Okay, so now we got the shallow 12mm socket with the flex head again, and we're going to go through and tighten up all of these 12mm bolts for the power steering pump. There we go. Now we got everything all tightened down. We got the new alternator in. We tightened up the AC bolts on the bottom. And then we got the power steering pump back in. Okay guys, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put on a serpentine belt. Before I install the power steering pump reservoir, I'm going to put the belt on. It just makes it a little easier with some more extra access to the belt area. So again, it's just trying to, again, I'm using a T60 Torx, the long reach ratchet flex head, and just trying to get enough slack on top of the pulley. There you go. So we got the serpentine belt on now. We just want to double check it, the light, and make sure the pattern is correct and all the teeth is in the right spot. You can see right here, the tensioner pulley is just a little bit off. So I'm just gonna take the T60 again and just apply some pressure and slide it in. There you go. So now it looks like all the teeth on the pulleys is lined up with the belt. So our next step is going to be reinstalling all the power steering lines in the power steering reservoir. Okay guys, so next step is to reattach the power steering pump reservoir. So you want to be real quick and connect the hoses, try not to leak as much fluid as possible. So slide on the soft hose. Got it attached. Gonna slide the power steering reservoir into its position where it mounts. It just clicks right in. The next step is we're gonna take the hard line and we're gonna attach that back to the power steering pump. It's a matter of wiggling it over, pushing it back into its spot, and it's gonna be a 16mm. Get the thread started. You're going to take the 16mm open end wrench and just snug it down. Got it nice and tight. Okay guys, so we got everything all back together now. We got the new alternator installed down there. You can see it right down there. So yeah, so everything's all installed and tightened up. So now the next thing we have to do is just go in the back and reconnect the battery. Okay guys, so here in the back, it's gonna reconnect the battery. Got the battery all snugged up. So yeah, next thing we're gonna do is start it up and we're gonna check to make sure it's charging. Okay guys, so here we are in the back of the Volvo. We just changed the alternator in this car. So now we're going to do a volt test to make sure the alternator is charging. So how we're going to do that is I got my multimeter connected to the battery. I just used some vice grips just to connect it just for this video. So you're going to just turn your multimeter on to volts DC. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the car and make sure the voltage comes up and the alternator is charging the battery. So there you go guys, I started the car and you can see the voltage on the multimeter went up to 14.10, 1411. So that's a good number. So that's, you know, within range of this vehicle specs. So that means the alternator is working properly. So yeah, look like this one's working good. So yeah, let's get everything all closed up. And okay guys, so we got the motor running. We just want to double check the belt pattern, make sure the belt's spinning okay and not getting shredded up. Sometimes if the belt is a little bit off, you know, one toot off, it'll cut up the belt and the serpentine belt won't be good. So just double checking that. I know we checked it earlier, but I always like to be certain about it. Checking everything else, checking all the power steering lines for leaks. Everything looks good. Okay guys, so this is going to be our video for our Volvo S60, our alternator replacement. But I guess this video could also be used for a serpentine belt replacement and power steering pump replacement, because we have to remove and reinstall that parts also. So this video might benefit that as well. So yeah, hope you guys all enjoyed the video, everyone. So yeah, see you guys on the next one. Aloha.